Stephanie, it is fantastic to see you. I've been wanting to have you on the show. I am glad you finally made time for it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on all your success with the show and your book and everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, just quick intro. So Stephanie, really quickly in 10 seconds, what do you do for context for our listeners?
I currently work in executive communication for a technology firm. I'm here in my personal capacity today, perhaps based on my history as someone who's been deeply involved in the customer experience arena.
Well, she put that succinctly and modestly. Stephanie is a scholar in this space, and I've had the opportunity to have some exchanges with her over the years, and everyone gets smarter listening to her. So I want to jump right in. Let me. I've been accused of being somewhat pessimistic, but I'm really not. I'm an optimist, but I like to see the world as they are. So when I started doing podcasting, incidentally, when I would have conversations about customer service specifically and the customer experience overall, my general view was things are pretty bad, but they are improving. And that has now changed. One data point that I look at is, the ACSI, the American Customer Satisfaction Index, that tracks these things. And every single year up till 2018, we were making steady progress. It wasn't a hockey stick, but we're making steady progress. And then something sort of happened circa late 2019, 2020, and fast forward to 2024, we have erased all the gains, at least in that index, going back to 2006. So I start there and then say, if I then look at on the other side of things, of the number of CX practitioners, the number of companies focusing on this, every company on earth, I might be a slight exaggeration, has some acknowledgement of customer experience with care, which wasn't the case. So I feel like the kind of education about this and the prevalence of CX, you don't need to, when I started, you had to convince people. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. So I find those two things kind of, I'm getting a cognitive dissonance from that. Let me let you react to that. What do you get when you think about those two things?
So I think that there are multiple ways of looking at it. One of the things that we know from our deep, many years long input into the CX world now is that customer needs are not static. We also know that we have in our almost rearview mirror the COVID pandemic, where customer needs were completely changed almost overnight. And, we do have a waning sense of who should be helping to spearhead some of these initiatives or programs within organizations. CX is its own business discipline unto itself. It's not the same as marketing. It's not the same as other disciplines that it's been attached to. Comes with its own set of practices and principles.
Right.
So, it could be any combination of things. Who knows?
Yeah. So people who run these businesses, whether it's in the corporate arena or in public sector, are smart, capable people who generally are trying to do things based on ROI. And the only conclusion I can come up with is perhaps we have not convinced those who need convincing on the ROI of CX, right? It's like, I think we know it and we all believe it, but if I'm watching the actions and we can get into some examples. How do you answer the question when someone goes, what's the ROI of creating this experience customers love?
Well, I love that you and I are having this conversation because after reading your book, I know you're no nonsense. Let's really talk about what could be causing some of these reasons and what might be standing in the way of trepidation toward really expanding what we define as ROI. Because
Right.
as we've seen in the news over the last few years now, there's a negative implication for purposefully bad customer experience. I saw you refer to this in one of your recent podcasts, the SiriusXM, most recent lawsuit in the state of New York. This is not
Yep.
SiriusXM's first rodeo with class action lawsuits that are similar in nature. We also know that there was a $60 million fine to Toyota Motor Credit for some allegedly purposefully bad CX that had been set up. And of course, we're all familiar with now the years-long couple $1 billion in fines now from Wells Fargo for some of the customer-related mishaps that happen there and that come from a view that could have been prevented, didn't necessarily have to happen. So if we're looking at what the ROI is, what I see, and I don't know what you see, is a little bit of tunnel vision. We're looking at it like the ROI is only in terms of profits. These less sexy ideas, like potentially class action lawsuits, really don't seem to have made it into the view yet in the field and practice of customer experience as a business discipline.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think I have a related theory. I would be curious to hear your take on it. Is, I used to work in industry, and I had serious envy of my marketing counterpart who we would be in a meeting and they'll just joke, ha 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 ha, half of our investments are, we waste half of our marketing dollars, but we can't tell you which half. And then the CFO writes another check and another check. and I had service and a few other things, and I was always having to justify my existence. And I think it's perhaps in line with our dopamine-filled world that says, when I spend a marketing dollar on outreach, something happens. Customer reaches out, they buy, they might not be the right customers, who cares? But cha-ching, something happens. When you do some of the things that people like you and me recommend companies do that are kind of more long-term, the something that happens might be 18 months from now of 18 months of these customers referring your brand, increasing wallet share slowly, but they stick around. And there are times I just think that some of the headwind is simply that when someone asks you, what's the ROI of this? Saying that, well, I don't know, maybe we will prevent a $2 billion lawsuit, right? Or the ROI is over the long term. These same customers paying us $50 a month now, they would love us so much, even if we went to 55, they would stay or they would refer our friends, and people would just yawn because there's an easy, hit. I put money into this thing and something happens. Are you sympathetic to that view?
100%. And I think about one of the very first things that I learned in this industry from Nancy Port, who is another longtime CX person in our world. And I remember she used the words fortitude, organizational fortitude with respect to CX. You really have to be ready to put in the time with the right leadership in place to experience some of these longer term benefits. And it does take time because there are people and processes involved and people who have input into what you do as an organization that can join you or perhaps be pulled into another imperative.
So I follow you on Twitter and I think on LinkedIn, but particularly on Twitter because you put out some really awesome stuff. So people, please check out. We'll put her LinkedIn info on and Twitter on there. She's a great follow. One of the things I learned from you, you do a lot of work around public sector, citizen services, or whatever the term is. It's an area that I've dabbled in a few times, and I've called you for help a couple of times as I was in there. And I'm going to say these words, and it's kind of, I can't believe I'm saying it. I think the private sector could learn from the public sector when it comes to CX. I mean, when you shared that, it blew my mind. And the one area, and you can go into more, is you shared with me, data, not just with me, with everyone around, transparency and the amount of data you can get about what the experience truly is. My gosh. I work with some C-suite executives on some companies, and they would fire the entire team if anyone ever published a fraction of what's there. Can you talk a little bit about what's been happening in public sector, because it affects all of us. All of us have to get driver's licenses, and one way or the other, we're all customers of them. Can you share a little more there?
And I love the way you led into this thread, because I remember about 11 years or so ago, maybe 12 now, I was the vice president of customer experience at the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which is a United States federal government agency. And I went into a government-wide meeting with some of the first enthusiasts in government. At that time, I was one of only 2 people in the United States federal government that had the CX words in my title. Before VA had a setup, before GSA had a setup. And the meeting facilitator asked everybody in the room to take sides. They said, everybody who thinks private sector is doing terrific with CX, go to one side. Everybody who thinks government's doing a great side, go to the other. I was the only one left standing on the government side. And the reason, one of the biggest reasons that I stood on that side 11 or 12 years ago, whenever it was, is because just the fact that there were 30 people in a room exchanging ideas, sharing resources and perspectives to advance the practice within government is something that wasn't even happening in the private sector at that time. We also had the benefit at that time of President Obama's directives. We were coming from all the way back from 1993. So government was clearly building at that time. And now they have reached, in the United States federal government anyway, a new inflection point with respect to transparency and data, and interweaving the practices and principles into the DNA of various government agency organizational culture. Transparency, absolutely. There's a whole website now with CX data, including the number of surveys that are going out to United States citizens, what some of the feedback scores are. It's all on, I believe, performance.gov/CX, I believe.
I poured over that data, and if you compare it to the black hole, so when I try as a consumer, try to compare private companies, I'm left with reviews and sampling issues and whatnot. I'm, for the most part, left with what they're willing to share with me. And I was compare that to the government. I was blown away as to what's accessible.
I think that's a really great point, and we have to look at that critically as well. Even in government, what exactly are they sharing? Why are they sharing it? According to what slice of the service are people responding to in terms of surveys and feedback? We have to think critically about government, as well as, to your point, really not seeing much in the private sector as well. So critical thought all around on the data.
And I want to stay on this, your scholarship and research on this, because it is so fascinating to me. Sludge is a term that's new to me that you introduced into my lexicon maybe a few years ago. I can't remember the first time I heard you say it, and I'll let you explain it. But it looks like, at least for now, it's mostly a governmental thing. But I think it has applicability, maybe called something differently in the private sector. Explain what sludge is.
So, and I definitely can't take credit for the term. Look up Cass Sunstein, who was at the ground zero of sludge creation in the United States federal government during the Obama administration. He's got a terrific book named Sludge. You can also catch him on YouTube. The work that he's done to call attention to this has been just fascinating. So that's Cass's word. But yes, sludge, think about it as friction, as mental, psychological friction when you're trying to get something done. We were talking a moment ago about the SiriusXM lawsuit. That's based on alleged sludge, where SiriusXM is alleged to have set up a purposefully bad, a purposefully cumbersome and time-consuming process for customers to have to trudge through, like sludge, in order to get what they're looking for. So that's what sludge is. To your point about it being something that could be more broad in scope, absolutely. And I see a particular applicability to employee experience. Because if you take a look at how much time your people say that they're spending on friction and long processes internally that's taking them away from their core work, you can put a dollar value on that and multiply that out over the number of employees that you have to get a sense of how much time are we wasting in terms of money. So if we do a little bit of sludge math, is that okay with you if we do a little bit here
Yeah.
just to show your listeners?
Yes,
So
please.
let's say you have, and I'm going to base this on a recent survey. In the US, there was respondents in a survey that said they waste 5 hours a week on tasks that should be automated or made easier. So let's say you have 1,000 employees. So that's 5 times 1,000. 5,000 hours a week being wasted on cumbersome sludge-filled processes. Now, let's say all of those employees, for the sake of simplicity, make $1,000 or $100 an hour. You have $500,000 worth of time in a week. Now, let's say 50 weeks a year, you've got $25 million over the course of a year in time being wasted on these friction-filled, sludge-filled processes that employees are having to navigate through that impacts their experience and the productivity that they're able to put forth for their companies. So there are some really great ways of calculating and thinking about the cost of bad experiences for employees. So there is definite applicability across the board.
Wow. That the ROI numbers are just staggering. I want to go back to customer sentiment a little. I think over the last, I can't even remember how many years, at least a decade, NPS, Net Promoter Score, how likely are you to recommend, became the belle of the ball and the only thing that mattered when we thought about customer sentiments in this business. I think NPS has gotten to its spoil by date. And I can give you example after example after example. But a quick one would be BlackBerry. Just shortly before their bankruptcy, some of the highest NPS in the land, and they went out of business. I could go on, not the gaming of the system. And so I I I'm struggling to see why there is such resistance. I didn't remember when CX became a religion and dogma that hey, we had this thing, it served us, and here we are. I don't know why people are clinging to it. How do you think about not just NPS, but the whole measuring, quantifiably measuring the customer experience?
I have a variety of viewpoints on this. I do agree with those who say that NPS served us well in terms of getting our foot in the door with decision makers about CX. It served a purpose
Yeah.
there. I do also agree that it can be time to move on. It's not the be all to end all. And of course, it always needs to be pulled together with a variety of metrics, but it's something that people understand. And I think that if NPS is something that people understand, your stakeholders understand, and it's what's going to lead you to the next step and the next step and the next step of building what you need to build, what you've been hired to build, then great. But I do think that we can move on without throwing shade at NPS. I
Yeah.
think that we have to, again, ask ourselves that critical question: is the problem really NPS, or is it that we're stuck on talking about NPS?
Mm.
So it's just a matter of thinking about it critically. But of course, CX pros don't make these decisions alone. They don't make them in the four walls of their own office. They have to influence and build and bring people along with them. So it's nothing that can happen overnight. And we have to acknowledge that reality.
Yeah, I to take this, little detour here. I do think that, you know, we can forget that this business we're in is a business of feelings by and large. Like there is objective things you're doing, but it's keeping up with customer expectations, how they feel about things and what have you. And we can't over quantify this thing. We can't over make it zeros and ones. And where I'm going is it seems like every solution to every problem known to man is technology. Like just sprinkle some technology on it and voila, it's like the teenagers and the body spray. Everything will be will be fine. And I think NPS is also one of those things where it's like you're looking for the thin. Like it's hard to chase sludge. Sludge, boring. But it's maybe just sexier to say, I've got this number and gosh darn it, if it moves up by X points, voila, I am this hero and I'm on the speaking circuit. I don't mean to be cynical, but I think we've gone away from the business of human betterment. And I'm not saying this as one who doesn't appreciate that this is a for profit or the business of there's dollars involved, but you're saying like you're trying to quantify something that's hard to quantify, which is how people feel about something and their opinions in a given day of time. Some humility in just accepting that, yeah, we will get it, then the puck would move, people will move on, and we'll keep evolving and trying our best to. And that's not the feeling at all.
No, that's kind of an oversimplistic view of how things work. Agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm chatting with Stephanie. We're having this fascinating conversations about customer experience. We've talked about the public sector a lot. I want folks to get to know you, so I'd like to ask my guests a fun question. So yours would be, what is a purchase under $50 that had an impact on your life, positively or negatively?
I would say an Apple AirTag.
Okay.
Because, and since I've bought them for myself, I've passed them along to others in my family who found a great benefit to being able to toss an Apple AirTag into your luggage and know exactly where it is when you're standing, say, at the Frankfurt airport, waiting for your luggage to come up, just knowing that it's there. You can pop those into your wallet or to your pocketbook or whatever. So for me, I really do value my Apple AirTags, and I know my family does with theirs as well.
That's a good one. That's a good
How about
one.
you? What about you?
Um, I would say the neti pot. I think, I don't know how many years ago,
What is
30
that?
years ago, so I have allergies. And it's $20. You put this thing in. I don't know if you've used this thing. It's a kettle, water, and saline solution, and you pour it up a nostril. I'm not as elegant with it. I usually feel like I'm being waterboarded at times. But if my allergies gets bad, I don't like to do it. But it is a lifesaver, and the quality of life I get from this, and it's all these years later, it's still like 20 something bucks for this plastic. It's a low tech for a technologist. It is probably top of my list, so that would be mine.
That's
It's a
terrific.
lifesaver. So I want to go into some of the research around CX and EX. And before I even go there, you've said this a couple of times, but I think it's worth repeating that. Talk a little bit as you answer this question, how the employee experience and customer experience are linked. I think we all
Mm.
know this in our gut, but talk a little bit about what you've seen over the years with these two.
Well, of course, this is another area where it's nearly impossible to put a metric on. We have some sense of the connection now. I think about from a case study perspective, the state of Vermont, another
Mm,
government case study where their regulatory agency, their licenses, the agency that
yeah.
gives licenses to hairdressers and such and nurses, were doing paperwork for tens of thousands of licenses or renewals every year, along with a lot of other things. They were all doing it by hand. And of course, that is quite a load on just a small staff of people. However, they put a technology platform in place that helped them to be able to take care of renewing licenses in a matter of minutes versus weeks. And
Mm,
that, of course, is the type of employee to customer experience connection that I think that we could possibly look at when we're trying to make those connections. And so that case study comes to mind for me. What do you think?
I I think this is an excellent one. Because then the data is there's some data, but it's incomplete. I think the way I like to think about it is think about the best companies when it comes to customer experience, right? Like just think about them and then think about their employee experience. If you're not convinced, I would simply ask you to get in a room with customer facing employees at any company, throw a rock, put them in a fake focus group, whatever, and ask them, what are your challenges? And to a man, you've done this many, many times. What you will not hear be the most prevalent part of the conversation is things they want for their own selves. What you will hear time and time and time again is, I cannot do this for my customer. You're in my way. Da, da, da. And then they might sprinkle in some more self-focused items. But the people who are, whether they're in sales or service or what have you, customer facing, those employees tend to be maniacally focused on how do they get meaning out of their jobs by being focused on the customer. And so those are the employees specifically, not that every employee doesn't matter, but if you go zero in on those who are facing your customer, it's almost a foolproof solution because they feel the customer's pain in the most direct way. And if you just make their lives easier, I doubt you would need to do anything else because they would say, hey, the customers are saying the website's like, and there is the deal. I think this is my theory to go on my soapbox a little here is the thing about what comes out of those conversations are never the top of their list are not shiny objects. They are not put a bot on this, they're that. They're like, get me out of the blue screen I'm looking at, or get me this, like, make this. And I think we get bored at that list because we're looking for the thing that you can go show people and say, wow, look at how great we are. And the last point I'll make, and I want to get your response to this before I move on, is I found it interesting over the years that let's take airlines. Let me just pick on that industry. I could do the same thing for a number of industry. When you go to an American, United, pick one, their website, and you navigate the thing, my gosh, I have very little to complain about. The website is clean, the UI is great, everything is fantastic. And even when I come back for support, as far as then I am all great. Then I get to the airport when I'm actually flying. And God forbid I need to converse with the gate agent. If you've ever peeked behind the thing, she doesn't even have a mouse. She's got like, like she's doing this. And that is where the wilderness I think we've been around this ESCX thing is all the focus and energy went to the putting the lipstick around the thing and the websites and that, and not enough went to the back end. And I can't prove it at every organization but there is more ROI in that back end than perhaps there in the front end. What do you think about that?
Well, my mind instantly first really goes back to the scholarship and what the scholarship tells us about
Mm,
employee experience related to these things as well. I've been asked a lot since I finished my PhD, what does the scholarship tell us about customer experience? We don't have a lot from the customer's point of view, save an experiment that was done, a couple of years ago that really stands out, which we can come back to. But there's far more scholarly evidence, peer-reviewed scholarly evidence on what exactly it is about their experiences that makes them feel a certain way about whether they're going to stay, whether they like their job, whether they're motivated to do their job. There's a lot more scholarship on that. And we are finding that instances like you just mentioned, these friction field kind of sludgy, I don't even have a mouse, so I've got to do extra things on this keyboard that is impacting my experience. These types of things do come up in the scholarship as being things that matter to employees with respect to their experience.
wow. Wow. I just want to go to a couple more places before we wrap up. Um, I was consuming some of what you put out there, and you talked a lot about, and I would use the wrong words, these customer. I don't want to use personas, but this is the archetype. I don't know what the right word is. So I picked one, say utilitarian. So help me put some meat around the bones and saying, I now know Stephanie is a utilitarian. What do I do with that?
I think a lot of it depends on your resources, your industry, what you can do. Of course, always focus on what you can do. And I think knowing more about personas can definitely be perhaps of more assistance more expeditiously in, say, a B2B type of environment where you have more relationship oriented customer relationships rather than transactional. So knowing these things about your clients can certainly help a lot. But to your point, there is some scholarship on utilitarian versus other types of feelings that people feel. Scholars are dissecting exactly what we mean when we talk about experience, and they've attached some validated instruments to the quantitative impact of how people are. Um, hedonic experiences, utilitarian experiences. There's a brand new study in the March 2024 issue of the Journal of Retailing and Consumer Service. We know that both of these types of wishes for experiences, do you want something that is pleasure or do you want something that is more utilitarian? We know that they both impact customer loyalty, but how do you know? Like to your point, how do you know which one is preferred? And I also think to your point, we have to look at customers maybe more individualistically rather than, we do tend to look at them, we group them together rather than try to think about their differences.
I think therein lies the key, and I think maybe even more complex is this idea that I might be utilitarian in one context. I go to 7-Eleven, for example, or convenience store. Don't please stop building rapport with me. I want to get in. I want to get out. Uh, let me go. On the other extreme, I'm with my family on a vacation on a resort. Yes, please. you know, I am a different uh, 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 person there. So I hope that with our advancement in technology and data, we can start to really hone in on the individual and start treating you as Stephanie, not uh, persona, female, this demographic, and start thinking about you as an individual.
I love what you're saying because that shows and is an argument for the reason that CX pros have a lot more work in front of them. This attention to this discipline, this thought around our customers, who they are, what they want, what does experience actually mean to them? We've got a lot more work to do. I think we've got a lot of road ahead of us.
I love that. And as we kind of wrap up, I would love to give you the stage and talk about, we are at a time where many organizations are retreating from customer experience. I started the show by saying how the profession exploded and what have you, and different organizations for different reasons. You've spent a lot of your career, most of your career in this field, fighting the good fight. Are you optimistic? What do you see the road ahead for CX pros everywhere?
Well, I definitely hope because there is a lot of opportunity out there. I do think it's incumbent upon CX pros and maybe people holding CX pros accountable that they take a good long look at the need to expand how they view the discipline, because we're beyond surface level conversations now about surveys and journey mapping. I believe that organizations need their customer experience professionals and leaders to understand business risk and how the customer interacts with the business in such a way that may create risk that isn't really a core competency of customer experience as a business discipline. Business changes, landscapes change. I think that customer experience pros would be well suited to have a look at what is on the periphery, what's coming at us, how can I be more valuable as a business leader within my own business by taking a look at risk related and security related topics that I can then interweave into what I do and how I join arms with my colleagues and the people that I report to have a bigger, more impactful view of the work that I do and how it impacts the company.
Wow. Beautiful place to leave it. On the way out, I like to ask my guests, what fun or curious thing did you learn this week? I will go first. I had a guest on that taught me that she was going on Antarctica, and there is a body of water that is negative 15 degrees and cannot freeze because of the salt content. So the notion that water always freezes at a certain temperature, not true. if there is enough salt in the water. So that blew my mind and encouraged us to always challenge all of our assumptions. What about you?
I was discussing social media with a colleague, and social media is not my area of expertise. And she taught me the difference between an internet troll, a detractor, and sea lioning. I had never heard the term sea lioning before.
Go on.
It's a term that's used for an internet troll, if you will, but it's the type that only wants to debate. They only get into your comments in order to debate, and there's nothing that can be said to try to end a debate. So that's sea lioning, as I understand it, from a colleague I was talking to this week, which was fascinating. I'd never heard the word before.
Interesting. What's a detractor? Just a negative?
A negative. Yeah, just a negative. Yeah. And a troll is like one step deeper, and then the sea lioning is one step deeper. As I understand it anyway, and I hope I've gotten it right.
That is fascinating. Stephanie, I do hope you come back to the show. This has been fascinating. I cannot wait for all of you to listen to our conversation. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. Okay.
You've been listening to an Amos Talks production.